Good afternoon, football fans. It is Tuesday, September 15th, 2020, and it's that time for the 2020 season premiere of the NFL, the week that was. I'll be going down the entire week one schedule, complete with scores and stats and some news, if there is any. And I'll also be telling you about my week 2 power rankings. I was going to do a video on the week 1 power rankings last week, but it totally crossed my mind. I mean, I did get those rankings up on Facebook, so I list them on Facebook every Tuesday morning. And this is pretty much going to be the same thing with these review videos. They'll be up on Tuesdays. Alright, so let's dive into the week that was in the National Football League. Week 1 of the 2020 season. Starting off with the kickoff game from last Thursday night. The Houston Texans at the Kansas City Chiefs. Of course, I had the Chiefs number 1 in my power rankings, and the Texans were ranked 13th. Kansas City takes this one 34-20. They start the season at 1-0, and next Sunday they're out the SoFi Stadium for the Chargers home opener. And then the 0-1 Texans will be back home to host Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens on Sunday afternoon. Now, before we get into all of this, I just want to tell you that, man, this opening week was crazy. We had a game that had 77 points and over 900 yards of offense. We had 6 fourth quarter comebacks. And we had 3 upsets on the board this week. So yeah, it was a wild week. Let's strap in. Let's get right into it. So again, we got the Chiefs over the Texans 34-20. I have the Chiefs number 1 in my power rankings and the Texans at 13. Kansas City improves to 1-0, and they're off to LA to face the Chargers at the new SoFi Stadium in Inglewood. The Texans, meanwhile, fall to 0-1. They'll open their home schedule Sunday against the Baltimore Ravens. So this is a tough start for the Texans, having to face the last 2 NFL MVPs to start the year. First, Patrick Mahomes, the 2018 MVP, and Super Bowl 54 MVP, I may add. And then you have the man who won the MVP honors last year, and Lamar Jackson, who the Texans face next. Yeah, that's brutal. All right, starting off with the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes was 24-32, completing 75% of his passes for 211 yards, 3 touchdowns and no picks, and a quarterback rating of 123.3. Story in this game was Clyde Edwards-Helaire. This is the rookie running back out of LSU who the Chiefs drafted late in the first round. And he started his NFL career off with a bang. 25 carries for 138 yards and a touchdown. Sammy Watkins, 7 catches for 82 and a touchdown. Meanwhile, both Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill each caught a touchdown in this game also. Chris Jones had 3 tackles, 1 assist, 1.5 sacks. And L'Jarius Sneed had 3 tackles, 2 passes defense, and an interception. And then you had a sack each from Frank Clark, Darian O'Daniel, and Ben Neiman. For the Houston Texans, Deshaun Watson was 20-32, completing 62.5% of his passes for 253 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. He finished with a passer rating of 84.5. Also carried the ball 6 times for 27 yards and a rushing touchdown. David Johnson in his Texans debut, remember, he was dealt to Houston in the DeAndre Hopkins deal. And he looked like the 2017 David Johnson of the Cardinals. 11 carries, 77 yards, and a touchdown on the ground. He also added 3 receptions for 32 yards. Then Will Fuller led all Houston receivers with 8 catches for 112. And Jarrett Atkins had 2 catches for 39 yards and a touchdown. Jacob Martin had 2 tackles and a sack for the Texans defense. All right, total yards was pretty close in this game. 369 yards of offense for the Chiefs versus 360 for the Texans. Houston outpassed Kansas City, 242 passing yards to 203. But Kansas City had that solid running game anchored by their rookie workhorse, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They put up 166 rushing yards while the Texans had 118. First downs favored Kansas City, 28-21. Chiefs finished 7 of 13 on third down conversions. That's 53.8%. While the Texans were 4 out of 10 for 40%. And each team was 1 for 1 on fourth down. The Chiefs defense had 40 tackles, 5 sacks, 2 passes defensed, 1 interception, no defensive touchdowns. Houston's defense recorded 52 tackles, 1 sack, 2 passes defensed, and no interceptions. Time of possession favored Kansas City, 34 minutes, 47 seconds, versus the Texans, 25-13. And this was pretty much a clean game, at least for the Chiefs. They were only flagged once for 5 yards, whereas Houston was penalized 5 times for 37. Closing line in this game was Kansas City minus 9.5. The final margin in this game was 14 points. The over-under at close was 53.5. There were 54 points scored in this game, so that just put this game over that total. The two teams combined for 729 yards and 92 offensive plays. My straight-up pick was 31-20 Kansas City. And I also had the Chiefs covering the 9.5 points, which they did, winning by 14. All right, now to the Sunday afternoon games. The next game up is the Chicago Bears at the Detroit Lions. Now, I have both of these teams ranked pretty low in my power rankings. I had the Bears at number 23 and the Lions at 20. All right, Chicago wins this one 27-23 as they scored 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to erase a 23-6 deficit. The Bears move to 1-0. Next Sunday, they will host the New York Giants at Soldier Field, while the 0-1 Lions travel to Lambeau to face the Packers. Mitchell Trubisky for Chicago was 20 of 36, completing 55.6% of his passes for 242 yards, with 3 touchdowns and no INTs. He finished with a passer rating of 104.2. Trubisky also ran the ball 3 times for 26 yards. David Montgomery had 13 carries for 64 yards and 1 catch for 10. Anthony Miller, 4 receptions, 76 yards and a TD. Jimmy Graham, in his Chicago debut, had 3 catches for 25 yards and a touchdown. And Allen Robinson, the third, 5 receptions, 74 yards. Danny Trevathan had 7 tackles on the Bears' defense. Roquan Smith recorded 5 tackles. And Antoine Hicks had 2 tackles and a sack. For the Lions, Matthew Stafford was 24 of 42, completing 57.1% of his passes for 297 with 1 touchdown and 1 interception and a 77.2 quarterback rating. Stafford also carried the ball 5 times for 23 yards. Adrian Peterson, who was cut by the Washington football team prior to the season, he made his Lions debut and looked pretty impressive. 14 carries for 93 yards, 3 receptions for 21. Danny Amendola had 5 catches for 81 yards. TJ Hawkinson, the second-year tight end out of Iowa, had 5 receptions for 56 yards and a TD. Tracy Walker led the Detroit defense with 9 tackles and 1 pass defense. Trey Flowers had 5 tackles, a sack, and he forced a fumble. Desmond Trufant, the ex-Falcon, making his Detroit debut. He had 2 tackles. And Justin Coleman had a pass defense in this game. Both would leave the game with hamstring injuries. And I think the Trufant injury is more key. Because you just got this guy, and he is brought in to shore up the secondary for the Lions. If you lose him, that's a blow. All right. The Lions actually outgained the Bears in total yards, 426 to 363. They also had more passing yards in this game, 288 to 214. The Bears ran for 149 yards, while the Lions had 138 on the ground. First downs were pretty much split down to even. The slight edge goes to the Bears. They had 26 first downs to Detroit's 25. But third down conversions were a struggle for both teams. The Lions were 6 for 16 at 37.5%, while the Bears were 2 for 11 at 18.2%. The Bears also were 1 for 2 on fourth down conversions, 50%, and Detroit did not have a fourth down play. Chicago's defense had 55 tackles, 1 sack, 4 passes defense, and an interception. The Lions' defense had 50 tackles, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, 5 passes defense, and no interceptions. The Lions also won the time of possession battle, 30 minutes 55 seconds versus 29 minutes and 5 seconds for the Bears. And both teams were hit hard with the flags. Detroit was penalized 8 times for 77 yards. Chicago had 6 penalties for 48. Closing line was Detroit minus 2.5. The final margin in this game was 4 points. The over-under at close was 42.5. There were 50 points scored in this game, so that finished over the cover, or over the total, I should say. The two teams combined for 789 yards of offense and 105 offensive plays. Straight up, I took the Lions 24-16. And I also picked Detroit to cover the 2.5 point spread, which since they lost, they didn't. And I'll tell you my records in picking these games against the spread and straight up at the end. So stay tuned for that. All right, next up, the Cleveland Browns at the Baltimore Ravens. I had the Ravens at number 3 in my power rankings and the Browns at 19. Baltimore whooped Cleveland 38-6. Ravens start the year 1-0. They're off to Houston to face Deshaun Watson and the Texans next week, while the 0-1 Browns will have very little time to dwell on this one because they got a game coming up Thursday night at home against the Cincinnati Bengals and another former number 1 draft pick in Joe Burrow. Or should I say this year's number 1 draft pick in Joe Burrow. Because Baker Mayfield was the number 1 player taken in 2018. Anyway, Lamar Jackson, the reigning NFL MVP, 20 of 25, completing 80% of his passes, 275 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, and a quarterback rating of 152.1. So he was nearly perfect. He also carried the ball 7 times for 45 yards, typical Lamar Jackson. Mark Ingram, 10 carries, 29 yards. He was pretty much held in check. J.K. Dobbins, this is the rookie running back from Ohio State who Baltimore drafted in April. Had 7 carries, 22 yards, and 2 touchdowns in his NFL debut. Michael Hollywood Brown had 5 receptions for 101 yards. Willie Snead, the fourth, 4 catches for 64 and a TD. And Mark Andrews had 5 receptions, 58 yards, and 2 touchdowns. L.J. Fort led Baltimore's defense with 6 tackles and 1 forced fumble. And Patrick Queen, this is another rookie from LSU. He had 5 tackles, a sack, and a forced fumble in his NFL debut. As for the number 1 overall pick in the 2018 draft, Baker Mayfield of the Cleveland Browns, 20 of 38, 52.6% of his passes completed. For 188 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, he closes the day with a 64.4 QB rating. And he also carried the ball twice for 3 yards. Kareem Hunt, 13 carries, 72 yards, 4 receptions for 9 yards. Nick Chubb, 10 carries for 60 yards. Jarvis Landry had 61 yards on 5 catches. David Njoku, 3 receptions, 50 yards, and a TD. He left the game with a knee injury. And Odell Beckham Jr., he was a non-factor for Cleveland. Only 2 catches for 21. E.J. Goodson had 6 tackles. Claiborne and Thomas each recorded a sack. Total yards in offense was 377 for the Ravens, 306 for the Browns. Baltimore had 270 passing yards to Cleveland's 168. But the Browns had the better ground game, 138 rushing yards versus the Ravens' 107. First downs favored Baltimore 23-20. Third down conversions, the Ravens did not have problems converting them. 6 out of 11, 54.5%, no fourth down conversions. Browns did struggle on third down and on fourth down. Third down conversions, they were 3 of 12, converting 25%, while going 0 for 3 on fourth down. The Ravens defense had 49 tackles, 2 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, 5 passes defense, and an interception. The Browns defense recorded 48 tackles, 2 sacks, a forced fumble, 1 pass defense, and no interceptions. Time of possession nearly split right down the middle, but it favors Cleveland. 30 minutes and 2 seconds versus 29:58 for the Ravens, so it's razor thin. And these two teams were hit with the penalty flag often. The Ravens committed 7 flags for 66 yards, while Cleveland had 8 penalties for 80. Closing line was the Ravens -7. Closing margin was 32, so this was the biggest margin of victory for any team this week. Over-under was set at 47. This game finishes just under that total at 44. The two teams ran 97 offensive plays and combined for 686 yards. Or rather, 683 yards. My mistake. Straight up, I took the Ravens 38-21. That's a win. And against the spread, I also took Baltimore to cover the 7 points, which they did rather easily. So no problem with them. covering that 7-point spread. All right. Back to the NFC North we go for our next game. The Green Bay Packers at the Minnesota Vikings. This was number 9 and number 14 in my power rankings. And this was a shootout as Green Bay wins it 43-34. They start the year 1-0. Next Sunday, they will have their home opener at Lambeau Field against the Detroit Lions. While the 0-1 Vikings hit the road for the first time in 2020, they will face the Colts in Indianapolis. And I think the Colts are going to be very salty going into that game, and I'll explain in just a little bit. Starting off with the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers was 32 of 44, completing 72.7% of his passes, 364 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no picks. He finished with a quarterback rating of 127.5. He also carried the ball once for 2 yards. Aaron Jones, I should say, had 16 carries for 66 yards and a rushing touchdown, plus 4 receptions for 10. Devontae Adams, 14 receptions for 156 and 2 touchdowns. He was targeted by Aaron Rodgers 17 times. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, 4 receptions, 96 yards and a touchdown. Alan Lazard had 4 receptions, 63 yards and a touchdown. Christian Kirksey led the Green Bay defense with 10 tackles, while Alexander and Smith each recorded a sack. For the Minnesota Vikings, Kirk Cousins, pretty economical numbers here, 19 of 25, completing 76% of his passes for 260 yards with 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. He closes with a passer rating of 118.5. So really, both quarterbacks threw the ball well. Cousins also carried the ball 4 times for 34. Dalvin Cook, 12 carries, 49 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Adam Thielen, 6 receptions, 110, and 2 scores. And Olabisi Johnson had 3 receptions for 26 yards. Eric Kendricks led the Minnesota defense with 9 tackles, while Eric Wilson forced a fumble. All right, so the Green Bay Packers finishes with 522 yards of offense to the Vikings 382. They outgained Minnesota in the air, 364 passing yards to 248. And on the ground, 158 rushing yards to 134. Although both teams also ran the ball well. First downs favored Green Bay, 31-25. And both teams were hitting their third downs when they had to. 6 of 11, 54.5% for Green Bay. 3 of 6 and 50% completions for Minnesota. The Packers were 1 for 2 on 4th down, while Minnesota was 0 for 1. Green Bay's defense had 38 tackles, 2 sacks, and an interception. Minnesota's defense, 56 tackles, no sacks, 1 forced fumble, 1 pass defense, and no interceptions. Time of possession was a 2-1 edge to the Green Bay Packers, 41 minutes, 16 seconds versus Minnesota's 18:44. The Packers were penalized 6 times for 63 yards, while the Vikings were flagged 5 times for 20. Closing line was Minnesota minus 1.5, and the closing margin in this game was 9 points. The over-under was 44.5. They zipped right by that as they scored 77 points. So that obviously finished over, and I mean way over the closing total. Total yards totaled 904 by both teams as they combined for 94 offensive plays. All right, I picked the Packers straight up in this one, 24-20. And I also picked them to cover Minnesota 1.5 point spread as the road underdog, and I won both of those picks. All right, now we come to our first upset on the board. The Indianapolis Colts coming in at number 16 on my Week 1 power rankings at the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are at number 32. And Jacksonville pulls the stunner here 27-20. Jags go to 1-0. They will visit Nashville to face the Titans on Sunday, while the 0-1 Colts host the Minnesota Vikings. And just think, whoever loses that game will be 0-2. And if NFL history tells us anything, teams that start 0-2 do not have a good shot at making the playoffs. All right, Gardner Minshew II for Jacksonville was nearly flawless throwing the football. Listen to these numbers. 19 out of 20. He completed 19 of 20 passes. That's a 95% completion percentage. He only had 173 yards in the game, so he probably did a bunch of checkdowns. He threw 3 touchdowns and no picks and finished with a 142.3 passer rating, which will put him among the NFL's leaders in that category. Minshew also had 5 carries for 19 yards. Jalen Robinson, a rookie, had 16 carries, 62 yards, 1 reception for 28 in his NFL debut. Keelan Cole, 5 receptions, 47 yards and a TD. And Laviska Shenault Jr., another rookie, 3 receptions, 37 yards and a touchdown in his NFL debut. DJ Chark Jr. added another touchdown catch as well. He had 3 catches on the day for 25. Josh Jones led the Jacksonville defense with 10 tackles, and Miles Jack recorded 9 tackles and a sack. For the Indianapolis Colts, Phillip Rivers was 36 of 46, completing 78.3% of his passes for 363, with a touchdown and 2 interceptions, and a quarterback rating of 88.7. He also ran the ball once for 3 yards. Nyheim Hines had 7 carries for 28 yards and a rushing touchdown, 8 catches for 45 yards and a receiving touchdown. Marlon Mack was held in check by this Jaguar front. 4 carries for 26 yards. That's all he could produce. Plus 3 receptions for 30. So a pretty quiet day for Marlon Mack. Paris Campbell has 6 catches for 71. And then Jonathan Taylor, the rookie running back from Wisconsin, who the Colts drafted this past spring. 9 carries for 22 yards and 6 receptions for 67 in his NFL debut. And Colt fixture T.Y. Hilton had 4 receptions for 53. Darius Leonard led the Colts defense with 6 tackles and 1 pass defense. Kari Willis had a tackle and a sack. And DeForest Buckner, the ex-49er who signed with the Colts in the offseason, had 4 tackles in his Indianapolis debut, while Henderson and Wingard each recorded an interception. All right, so the Colts nearly doubled Jacksonville's offensive output as they outgained them in this game 445 to 241. They had more than a 2-1 edge in passing yards at 357 versus the Jags 150. Rushing yards were pretty close, 91 for Jacksonville, 88 for Indy. The Colts had 27 first downs versus Jacksonville's 17. Jaguars were 5 for 10 on third downs. That's 50% of their third downs completed. And no fourth down attempts for the Jaguars. The Colts were 4 of 12 on third down for 33.3%, and 1 for 3 on fourth down, also 33.3%. The Jaguar defense had 56 tackles, 1 sack, 2 passes defensed, and 2 interceptions. Indy's defense recorded 42 tackles, 4 sacks, 2 of those coming from Derek Autry, 1 pass defense, and no interceptions. Time of possession favored Indianapolis. They possessed the ball for 33 minutes, 23 seconds versus 26-37 for the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jags were flagged 6 times for 61 yards, while Indianapolis were penalized 5 times for 80. Closing line was the Colts minus 7.5. Margin was 7 points. The over-under was 44. Total points was 47, so this game finished over the total. The two teams combined for 686 yards and 98 offensive plays. Straight up, I took Indianapolis in a blowout, 34-17. And I also had them covering that 7.5 point spread, which is pretty obvious based on these numbers. They lost. All right. The Las Vegas Raiders, ranked number 18 in my power rankings, visited the Carolina Panthers, ranked number 28. And this was a shootout. Vegas wins it 34-30 in a game that saw 7 lead changes. The Raiders start off 1-0, and they will open up their new home, Allegiant Stadium, on Monday Night Football against Drew Brees and the New Orleans Saints. While the 0-1 Panthers are off to Tampa to face Tom Brady and the Bucs. Starting off with the Vegas Raiders, Derek Carr was 22 of 30, completing 73.3% of his passes for 239 yards, with 1 touchdown and no interceptions, and a 107.5 QB rating. Josh Jacobs, he couldn't be stopped. 25 carries for 93 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. He also added 4 receptions for 46. Henry Ruggs III, rookie, 3 receptions, 55 yards, 2 carries, 11 yards. Josh Jacobs, 4 receptions, 46 yards. Darren Waller, 6 receptions for 45. And former Eagle Nelson Aguilar, making his Las Vegas debut, had 1 catch for 21 yards, but that 1 catch did go for a TD. Jonathan Abram, another rookie for the Raiders, led the defense with 11 tackles. And then newcomers Nick Kwiatkowski, who came over from the Chicago Bears, and Corey Littleton from the LA Rams, combined for 8 tackles. Kwiatkowski had 5, while Littleton had 3. For the Carolina Panthers, Teddy Bridgewater was 22 of 34, completing 64.7% of his passes, 270 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks, and a 98.9 passer rating. Bridgewater also had 4 carries for 26 yards. Christian McCaffrey, this is why they call him Run CMC, 23 carries, 96 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. He also added 3 receptions for 38. Robbie Anderson, the former Jet, in his Panthers debut, he went off 6 receptions for 115 and a touchdown. DJ Moore, 4 receptions, 54 yards. Curtis Samuel, 5 receptions, 38 yards, and 1 carry for 5 yards. Shaq Thompson and Jeremy Chin led the Carolina defense with 8 tackles apiece. Total yards favored the Carolina Panthers in this one, 388 to 372. They had more passing yards than the Raiders, 260 to 239. But the rushing edge slightly goes to Las Vegas, 133 to 128. First downs also went to the Raiders, 23 to 22. And both teams were hitting their third downs. Vegas was 6 of 11 for 54.5%, while Carolina was 7 of 13 for 53.8%. The Panthers were 1 for 2 on fourth down, while Vegas did not attempt a fourth down play. Vegas' defense had 54 tackles, 1 sack, 2 passes defense, and no interceptions. The Panthers' defense, 50 tackles, no sacks, 1 forced fumble, 3 passes defense, and no interceptions. Time of possession battle was won by the Raiders. They held the ball for 31 minutes and 12 seconds, while the Panthers had it for 28-48. As for penalties, the Raiders had 3 for 40 yards, while the Panthers had 5 for 65. Closing line was Vegas minus 2.5. Closing margin was 4 points. The over-under was 48 points. But the two teams combined to score 64, so this finished well over that number. And this was the second highest scoring game on the Week 1 schedule. The two teams combined for 104 offensive plays and 760 total yards. All right, I picked the Raiders 27 to 23 as my straight up pick, and I also picked them to cover the 2.5 points, which they do. There's a win. Both ways there. All right, on to page 2. Got the New England Patriots New England Patriots hosting the Miami Dolphins. This is the first of 2 AFC East matchups we'll be looking at. I had the Patriots ranked number 15 in my power rankings and the Dolphins at 26. New England wins this one 21 to 11. That's kind of a weird score if I do say so myself. Anyway, the Patriots open up the season 1-0. Next up is a date to the home of the 12th man as they'll face the Seattle Seahawks on Sunday Night Football. The 0-1 Dolphins gets no easier for them. They return home to host the Buffalo Bills. And we'll be looking at their game against the Jets next. All right, Cam Newton, 9 seasons in Carolina, making his New England debut as Tom Brady's predecessor. 15 of 19, completing 78.9% of his passes for 155 yards. With no touchdowns or interceptions, he finishes with a 100.7 quarterback rating. He also carried the ball 15 times for 75 yards and scored 2 touchdowns on the ground. So not a bad Patriots debut for Cam Newton. Sony Michel, 10 carries, 37 yards and a touchdown. Julian Edelman, 5 receptions for 57. N'Keal Harry, 5 receptions, 39. James White, 5 carries, 22 yards. 3 receptions for 30. Adrian Phillips led the Patriot defense with 8 tackles. He also had an interception in this game. Meanwhile, Stephon Gilmore and J.C. Jackson, these are the combined numbers for both of them. They had 5 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 1 pass defense. For the Miami Dolphins, Ryan Fitzpatrick finished 20 of 30, completing 66.7% of his passes for 191 yards with no touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Yeah, you heard me, 3 interceptions. He finishes with a 44.6 passer rating. Fitzpatrick had 5 rushes in this game as well for 18 yards. Myles Gaskin, 9 carries, 40 yards, 4 receptions for 26. Matt Breida, the former 49er running back, in his Dolphin debut at 5 carries for 22 yards. And Devontae Parker, 4 catches for 47. That was before he ended up leaving the game with a hamstring injury. We'll see if that hamstring is severe enough to keep him out Sunday against the Bills. And Preston Williams had 2 receptions for 41. Jessamine Baker led Miami's defense with 13 tackles. He also had a sack and a forced fumble. And then Christian Wilkins had 4 tackles, a sack, and 2 passes defensed. All right. The New England Patriots had 357 total yards of offense versus Miami's 269. Although the passing yards edge goes to Miami, 182 to 140. But the rushing yards edge goes to New England big. They had 217 rushing yards versus the Dolphins' 87. First downs also favored New England, 29 to 20. Patriots finished 5 of 10 on third downs, that's 50%. Dolphins were 4 of 11, 36.4%. And New England converted their only 4th down play of the game. New England's defense had 45 tackles, 1 sack, 2 passes defense, and the 3 picks that I just talked about. Miami's defense had 55 tackles, 2 sacks, a forced fumble, 3 passes defense, and no interceptions. Time of possession favored New England. They held the ball for 34 minutes and 49 seconds, whereas the Dolphins only had it for 25-11. And this was kind of a clean game across the board for both teams, as Miami was flagged 4 times for 35 yards, and New England only 3 penalties for 47. Closing line was New England minus 7.5. Margin was 10 points at the end of the game. Over under at close was 45.5. Scoring just 32 points combined. This game obviously fell well below that 45.5 total. And this was also the second lowest scoring game in week 1. The two teams combined for 100 offensive plays and only 626 total yards. I picked the Patriots straight up and against the spread and won. Alright, as for the other game in the AFC East, that was the New York Football Jets, number 30 in my power rankings, at the Buffalo Bills, number 8. Home team wins this one, 27-17. Buffalo starts the year 1-0. They're off the South Beach to face the Dolphins on Sunday, while the 0-1 Jets will host the San Francisco 49ers, and I'll tell you how they did against the Arizona Cardinals a little bit later on, so stick around. All right, starting off with the Bills. Josh Allen, 33 of 46, completed 71.7% of his passes for 312 yards, 2 touchdowns and no picks, and a 104.6 passer rating, plus 14 carries for 57 yards and a rushing touchdown. So he had nearly 370 yards of offense for the Buffalo Bills. All right, Devin Singletary, 9 carries, 30 yards, 5 receptions for 23. Stephon Diggs, the longtime Minnesota Viking making his Buffalo debut. He had 8 catches and 86 yards in his first game in a Bills uni. John Brown, 6 receptions, 70 yards, and a touchdown. Cole Beasley had 4 grabs for 58. A.J. Klein and Taron Johnson each recorded 5 tackles to lead the Buffalo defense. Johnson also had a pass defense. Addison, Murphy, and Dotson each recorded a sack for the Buffalo defense. As for the New York Football Jets, Sam Darnold, 21 of 35, completing 60% of his passes for 215 yards. He threw a touchdown and an interception and closed the game with a 75.3 quarterback rating. And he also carried the ball once for 6 yards. The ageless Frank Gore, yeah, he's still playing. He had 6 carries for 24 yards. Le'Veon Bell in his second year with the Jets, 6 carries for 14, 2 receptions for 32. So a pretty quiet day for Lev Bell. Jamison Crowder, he was anything but quiet. 7 receptions for 115 yards and a touchdown, and he was targeted 13 times by Darnold. So he's the man who caught Sam Darnold's only touchdown pass in this ball game. Chris Herndon, 6 receptions, 37 yards. All right, and then we got a lot of defensive numbers to talk about. McDougal, Poole, and Austin each had 7 tackles. Poole, that's Brian Poole, also had a sack and a pass defense. Bradley McDougal, in addition to his 7 tackles, had a pass defense. And Bless Austin, in addition to his 7 tackles, he had a forced fumble along with Marcus May, who also recorded 2 sacks and 2 passes defense. Yards favored the Bills, 404 to 254. Passing yards also favored Buffalo, 306 to 202. Rushing favored the Bills as well, 98 to 52. And first downs were a 2-1 edge to the Bills. 31 first downs for Buffalo versus 15 for the Jets. Bills were 7 for 14 on third down conversions for 50% and 1 for 1 on fourth down. New York was 4 of 11 on third downs, that's 36.4%, and they did not have a fourth down play in this game. The Bills defense records 36 tackles, 3 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 2 passes defense, and an interception. The Jets defense had 68 tackles, 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 6 passes defense, and no picks. Time of possession also added better than a 2-1 clip to Buffalo, 41-16 to 18-44. In fact, these are the same numbers in the Green Bay, Minnesota game. And the penalties flew the most in this game. There were 16 total penalties committed by both these teams, with the Jets committing 9 fouls for 95 yards, and Buffalo had 7 penalties for 80. So again, 16 penalties and 175 penalty yards. That makes it an ugly game. Closing line was Buffalo minus 6.5. Closing margin was 10 points. Over under at close was 39.5. The two teams combined for 44 points, finishing over the total. They also combined for 658 yards on 104 offensive plays, with Buffalo running 68 of them. And I obviously took the Bills 19-13, but I took the Jets to cover the spread, which Buffalo pretty much did with ease, winning by 10. So that's my third loss against the spread this week. And then that brings us to our next upset on the board. The Philadelphia Eagles, who has injured the Philadelphia Eagles, and where injuries have ravished the offensive line, they came in at number 12 in my power rankings. They went down to the nation's capital to face the Washington football team, or as I like to call them, the Washington No Names. And they were ranked 31st in my power rankings. And Washington pulls the upset here, 27-17. The No Names are now 1-0. They'll face the Cardinals in Glendale on Sunday, while the 0-1 Eagles will hope for a much better outcome against Jared Goff and the Rams in their home opener at the Link on Sunday. We'll start off with the offensive numbers for the Washington No Names. Dwayne Haskins Jr. was 17 of 31, completing 54.8% of his passes for 178 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks, and an 82.5 passer rating. He also carried the ball 17 times for 17. Antonio Gibson, 9 carries, 36 yards, 2 receptions, 8 yards in his NFL debut. Peyton Barber had 17 carries in this game. He was held to 29 yards on those 17 carries, but he did score 2 touchdowns. Scary Terry McLaurin, which was probably the only real offensive weapon that Washington has, he had 5 receptions for 61 yards. Steven Sims Jr. had 3 catches for 50, and Logan Thomas had 4 catches for 37 and a TD. Troy Apke led the Washington defense with 7 tackles, while rookie Chase Young had 2 tackles and 1.5 sacks. As for the Eagles, not much to talk about here. Carson Wentz, 24 of 42, completing 57.1% of his passes, 270 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He had a 72.5 passer rating. And you can pretty much blame the offensive line for this one, as Carson Wentz was sacked 8 times in this game. No joke. Boston Scott, 9 carries, 35 yards. He left the game with an undisclosed injury. We'll see what his status is for the Rams game on Sunday as the week progresses. Dallas Goedert, 8 receptions, 101 and a touchdown. Zach Ertz, who I think is going through some contract drama with the Eagles right now. He had 3 catches, 18 yards, and a touchdown. And Nathan Gary led Philly's defense with 8 tackles. And there was not a lot of offense in this game, although the points scored in this game would tell you otherwise. There was really not a lot of offense. Philly had 265 yards of offense versus Washington's 239. Passing yards also favored the Eagles at 208 to 159. But Washington had an 80 to 57 rushing advantage. First downs also favored Philly, 19 to 18. And both teams had a hell of a time converting third down conversions. Philly was 5 of 14 on their third down conversions. That's 35.7%. Washington was worse. They were 5 of 18, hitting just 27.8%. Fourth down conversions, Washington was 1 for 2. Philly was 0 for 2. Washington's defense had 39 tackles, the aforementioned 8 sacks. They also had 2 forced fumbles, 3 passes defense, and they picked off Carson Wentz twice. Philadelphia's defense had 50 tackles, 3 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 4 passes defense, and no interceptions. Time of possession favored the Eagles, 30 minutes 39 seconds versus Washington's 29-21. Washington had 7 penalties for 55 yards, whereas the Eagles played a relatively clean game, 3 for 20. And one thing I didn't tell you, Philadelphia had a 17-0 lead late in the second quarter in this game, and they just blew it because the offensive line could not protect Carson Wentz, and that led to the 8 sacks by Washington. Closing line was Philly minus 5.5. Margin was 10 points at the end. Over under at close 41.5. Total points was 44, so that just finished over the total. And as I said, no offense to speak of. Only 89 total plays and 504 total yards by the two teams in this game. That's it. I picked the Eagles to win straight up and against the spread. And I obviously lost both of them. Much like everyone else who picked the Eagles also lost. And in the final game on the early window on Sunday afternoon, at the Seattle Seahawks, which I had number 5 in my power rankings, visiting the Atlanta Falcons, ranked number 25. And I should have told you at the beginning that this game was brought to you by the number 25. Because the Falcons were number 25 in my power rankings, and they scored exactly 25 points in a 38-25 loss to the Seahawks. Seattle is 1-0. They're headed back home to host New England on Sunday Night Football, while the 0-1 Falcons travel to Dallas to face the team that just lost on Monday Night Football, the Dallas Cowboys. More on that in a second. All right, starting off with Seattle. Russell Wilson. Very solid numbers. 31 of 35, completing 88.6% of his passes. That's impressive. Throw the ball 35 times and only miss 4. That's very impressive. He had 322 yards with 4 touchdowns and no picks and a 143.1 QB rating. And Wilson also showed off his legs a little bit. 3 carries for 29 yards. Carlos Hyde, one-time rival of the San Francisco 49ers, now with the Seahawks, had 7 carries, 23 yards, and a touchdown in his Seattle debut. Chris Carson, 6 carries, 21 yards, 6 receptions, 45 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. DK Metcalf, 4 grabs for 95 and a TD. Tyler Lockett, 8 receptions, 92 yards. Greg Olsen, also making his Seahawk debut, had 4 grabs for 24 and a TD. Jamal Adams, of course, back in August, they got him in a trade with the New York Jets. He led Seattle's defense with 10 tackles and a sack in his Seahawk debut. Long-time mainstay on this Seattle front 7, Bobby Wagner had 4 tackles and 3 passes defense. And Quandre Diggs had 2 tackles, 1 pass defense, and an interception. I mean, give the Atlanta Falcons credit. They did play well in this game, especially Matt Ryan. 37 of 54, clean 68.5% of his passes for 450 yards with 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. He had a 98.5 QB rating. Todd Gurley the second, back in the state of Georgia since he suited up for the University of Georgia, making his Falcons debut. The former Rams running back had 14 carries, 56 yards, and a touchdown, and 2 receptions for 1 yard. And then you had the receivers. And these 3 all put up over 100 yards. All right. Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, and Russell Gage Each recorded 9 catches and were targeted 12 times. So 2/3 of Matt Ryan's pass attempts went to these 3 receivers. And neither one of them let him down. Julio Jones finished with 9 catches for 157. Ridley had 9 catches for 130, and he scored both the touchdowns. And Russell Gage, not too shabby himself, had his 9 catches go for 114. So if you add those numbers up, that's 27 catches on 36 targets for 401 yards by Jones, Ridley, and Gage. Great game by those 3. Deion Jones led the Falcon defense with 9 tackles. Grady Jarrett had a tackle and 1.5 sacks. Atlanta outgained Seattle as far as total yards is concerned. The Falcons had 506 yards to the Seahawks 383. Passing yards clearly favored Atlanta, 434 to 299. But Seattle held a slight rushing edge, recording 84 rushing yards versus the Falcons' 72. First downs also favored Atlanta, 28 to 22. Whereas the Falcons were hitting their third downs, 7 of 14 for 50%. The Seahawks were not hitting their third downs for the most part, 3 out of 9, 33.3%. Seattle did convert their lone 4th down play, whereas Atlanta went for it on 4th down 4 times and failed to convert on all 4 attempts. Ouch. Seattle's defense had 54 tackles, 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 7 passes defense, and 1 interception. Atlanta's defense had 50 tackles, 3 sacks, 1 pass defense, no interceptions, and time of possession favored Seattle, 30 minutes, 31 seconds versus 29-29 for the Falcons. And both teams committed 6 penalties, as Seattle was flagged for 46 yards. Atlanta was flagged 72 on their 6 penalties. And this is kind of strange too. The closing line had the Falcons favored by a point. Although going into the game, Seattle was favored. So I'll base that off of the point spreads from Wednesday. The over-under was 49.5. By the way, the margin in this game was 13 points. This game finished over the 49.5 as the two teams combined for 63 points, 889 yards, and 104 offensive plays. I picked Seattle 31-24 over Atlanta, and I also picked them to cover what was at the time, I think, a 2-point spread. And they did that with ease, winning by 13. So I will count both of those picks as wins. All right, now to the late portion of the Sunday night schedule, or the Sunday afternoon schedule. There are only 3 games in that late window on Sunday. Starting off with the Los Angeles Chargers. In at number 24 in my power rankings from week 1. And starting Tyrod Taylor at quarterback after Phillip Rivers left for Indianapolis. They were in Cincinnati to face the Bengals, who are ranked number 27. And this was a close game. Right down to the wire. This was a close game from start to finish, as the Chargers get the road win 16-13. LA goes to 1-0, and they will play their first game at the new SoFi Stadium on Sunday against the defending Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs. Good luck, Tyrod. You'll need it. The 0-1 Bengals will play the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland a little more than 48 hours from now on Thursday night. All right. So, looking at the Chargers, the aforementioned Tyrod Taylor. 16 of 30, completing 53.3% of his passes. He had 208 yards through the air with no touchdowns and no interceptions and a 75.4 quarterback rating, plus 6 carries for 7 yards. Austin Eckler had little to no trouble running on that weak Cincinnati front seven as he registered 84 yards on 19 carries, plus 1 catch for 3 more. Joshua Kelly had 12 carries for 60 yards and a touchdown. Hunter Henry, 5 receptions, 73 yards. Mike Williams, 4 receptions for 69. Keenan Allen, 4 receptions for 37. Casey Hayward Jr. led the Charger defense with 12 tackles as well as 2 passes defense, while Joey Bosa had 3 tackles and a sack. For the Bengals, the number 1 overall pick in the 2020 draft, Joe Burrow, the former national champion and reigning Heisman Trophy winning quarterback from LSU, made his Bengals debut, and there were some flashes. Well, otherwise, he did play kind of an okay game. 23 out of 36, completing 63.9% of his passes. That's awesome for a rookie in his first game. 193 yards passing with no touchdowns and 1 interception. He had a 66.1 quarterback rating. Burrow is also another one of those dual threat QBs who can also run. He had 8 carries for 46 yards and a rushing touchdown. So he does have his first touchdown in the NFL. So congrats to you, Mr. Burrow. Joe Mixon, 19 carries, 69 yards, 1 reception for 2. AJ Green, 5 receptions, 51 yards. I think it's imperative for the Bengals that he stay healthy. CJ Uzomah, 4 receptions, 45 yards. Tyler Boyd had 4 catches for 33. Jermaine Pratt and Von Bell each recorded 8 tackles for the Cincinnati defense. Total yards favored the Chargers, 362 to 295. In fact, total yards, passing yards, and rushing yards all favored the Chargers. Total yards was 362 to 295. Passing was 207 to 173. Rushing was 155 to 122. Both teams had 19 first downs in the game. And both were nearly even as far as third down conversions. They both made 6 third down conversions. Bengals were slightly better, 6 of 14, 42.8%. Chargers were 6 of 16, 37.5%. And 0 for 2 on fourth down. All right. LA's defense had 52 tackles, 3 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 2 passes defense, and an interception. The Bengal defense had 56 tackles, 2 sacks, 5 passes defense, and no picks. Time of possession, a slight advantage to the Chargers. They held the ball for 30 minutes, 10 seconds. Bengals 29-50. LA was flagged 6 times for 35 yards. Cincinnati 7 for 44. Closing line was the Chargers at -2.5. Margin ended up being 3. Over/under in this total was 41.5. And at 29 points scored, obviously finishing under that number, this is also the lowest scoring game across the NFL in Week 1. 2 teams combined for 657 yards and 108 offensive plays. And I forgot to mention that the Bengals had a shot to send this game to overtime, but a missed field goal thwarted all that. All right, I did pick the Chargers to win straight up and against the spread, and I was right both times. All right, now to the Arizona Cardinals at the San Francisco 49ers. Now, given the situation going on in Northern California with the wildfires, many thought that this game would not even play. But it turns out that Mother Nature gave them an assist and said, get out there, boys. All right, so Arizona came in at number 17 in my initial power rankings for 2020, whereas the reigning NFC champions were number 4. And you can call this an upset too, as the Cardinals went into Santa Clara and knocked off the reigning NFC champs 24-20. Cardinals are at 1-0. Next up, they host the Washington No Names in their home opener in Glendale, while the Niners prepare for a cross-country trip to New York to face the lowly Jets. Niners are 0-1. All right, Kyler Murray for the Arizona Cardinals was 26 of 40, completing 65% of his passes for 230 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 interception. He finishes with a 78.1 QB rating. But he anchored the ground game for the Cardinals, and that was huge, or rather instrumental in them winning this game. Murray carried the ball 13 times for 91 yards and scored a rushing touchdown to go with his passing touchdown. Kenyon Drake also had a rushing touchdown. He finishes with 16 carries and 60 yards, plus 2 receptions for 5 more. Chase Edmonds, 6 carries, 26 yards, 3 receptions, 19 yards, and a receiving score. And then you got DeAndre Hopkins, who the Cardinals pretty much stole in that trade with the Houston Texans. In his Arizona debut, he had 14 receptions for 151 yards, and Kyler Murray threw to him 16 times. And Larry Fitzgerald, a.k.a. Larry Legend, 4 receptions, 34 yards. So his streak of consecutive games with at least 1 catch continues. I don't know where that number is. I'll have to look it up. All right. Budda Baker led Arizona's defense with 12 tackles. And then rookie Isaiah Simmons, another steal for the Cardinals as the 8th overall pick in the draft, begins his career with 3 tackles. As for the 49ers, Jimmy Garoppolo was 19 of 33, completing 57.6% of his passes for 259 with 2 touchdowns and no picks. He closed with a 103 passer rating and 1 carry for 9 yards on top of his passing stats. Raheem Mostert. I was pronouncing his name wrong last year, and I apologize for all of that. He had 15 carries for 56 yards, 4 receptions for 95, and a receiving touchdown. So he was pretty instrumental in the Niners offense. Again, that's Raheem Mostert, not Mostert. George Kittle, 4 receptions, 44 yards, 1 carry for 9. And then Kyle Juszczyk, 1 reception for 41 yards. And then how about this? Jerick McKinnon. He missed the last 2 years due to injury. He played in his first game since 2017. And he made his impression felt. He had 3 carries for 24 yards and 3 receptions for 20 yards and a touchdown reception. Again, this is his first game back in nearly 3 calendar years. Niners really missed this guy. They're so happy to have him back. Emmanuel Emmanuel Mosley led San Fran's defense with 12 tackles, while Nick Bosa had 5 tackles and a forced fumble. Remember, Nick is the 49er, Joey is the Charger. All right, total yards favored the Cardinals, 404 to 366. Passing yards, a slight advantage to San Francisco, 243 to 224. And Arizona ran the ball pretty well. 180 to 123, the rushing edge goes to the Cardinals. And again, a little more than half of those rushing yards went to Kyler Murray, who had 91. All right, first downs also favored the Cardinals big, 29 to 18. Cardinals were hitting their third down, 7 to 14, 50%, no fourth down attempts. Niners struggled in late down situations. 2 of 11 on third down, completing 18.2%, and 0 for 2 on fourth down. Cardinals defense, 47 tackles, 3 sacks, 2 passes defense, no interceptions. Niners defense, 57 tackles, 2 sacks, forced fumble, pass defense, and 1 interception. Time of possession also favored the Cardinals. They held the ball for 31 minutes, 26 seconds, whereas the 49ers had it for 28-34. San Francisco was penalized 5 times for 53 yards, but Cliff Kingsbury really got to reel in these penalties. The Cardinals were flagged 9 times for 102. And that is it for this page. All right, the final Sunday afternoon game on the board is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, number 10 in my power rankings, at the New Orleans Saints, number 2 in my power rankings. This is Brady versus Breeze, part 1. And round 1 goes to the Saints, 34 to 23. New Orleans opens 1-0. They are off to Vegas next Monday night to face the Raiders in their new stadium, while the 0-1 Bucs will host the Carolina Panthers, who gave the Raiders a run for their money on Sunday. That's going to be fun. All right, starting off with the Saints. Drew Brees, 18 to 30, completing 60% of his passes for 160 yards with 2 touchdowns and no picks, and a 96.5 passer rating. Now many people have been saying that he really did not play all that well. Latavius Murray, 15 carries, 48 yards. Alvin Kamara, who as early as, say, 48 hours before kickoff, was in the middle of a contract dispute with the Saints. Well, he was out there and they signed him. Very limited production as far as touches and yards go, but he manages to find some way to get into the end zone. Kamara, 12 carries and only 16 yards, so he also had a rushing touchdown. He also had 5 receptions for 51 and a touchdown catch. Jared Cook, who the Saints got in the offseason from the Rams, he had 5 catches for 80 yards in his New Orleans debut. And that's not the only Saints receiver making his New Orleans debut. Emmanuel Sanders, who was in the Super Bowl for the 49ers last year, he had 3 catches for 15 yards and a touchdown in his Saints debut. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson led the New Orleans defense with 10 tackles and 1 pass defense. And Janoris Jenkins, the ageless Janoris Jenkins, he had 9 tackles. And an interception return for a touchdown. Now, many people in many circles said that Drew Brees didn't play all that well. Well, Tom Brady, I think, was a little bit worse. So Tom Brady, 20 years in New England, 11 division titles, 9 Super Bowl appearances, and 6 championships. Now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and this is how he did in his Bucs debut. 23 of 36, completing 63.9% of his passes, 239 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Un-Brady-like. Quarterback rating, 78.4. Again, un-Brady-like. 3 carries for 9 yards and a rushing touchdown. Now that's a lot like Brady. Ronald Jones II, 17 carries, 66 yards, 2 receptions for 16. Chris Godwin, 6 receptions, 79 yards. Scotty Miller had 5 grabs for 73. O.J. Howard, 4 receptions, 36, and a TD. And Rob Gronkowski, much like Tom Brady, making his Patriot debut. He won multiple titles in New England with Brady. He was a non-factor. 2 catches for 11 yards. That's it. Devin White led Tampa's defense with 9 tackles and a pass defense. And Antoine Winfield Jr. has 6 tackles and a pass defense. All right. Tampa Bay outgained New Orleans across the board in total yards, 310 to 271. Passing yards, 224 to 189. And rushing yards, 86 to 82. First downs also favored the Bucs, 23 to 18. And both teams struggled on third down. New Orleans was 5 of 15, 33.3%. Tampa Bay 5 of 13, 38.5%. The Bucs 1 for 1 on fourth down. New Orleans 0 for 1. Saints defense at 48 tackles, 3 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 3 passes defensed, 2 interceptions, one of which again was returned for a touchdown by Janoris Jenkins. Tampa Bay's defense, 56 tackles, 1 sack, 3 passes defensed, no picks. Time of possession win in favor of the Saints as they held the ball for 31 minutes and 23 seconds versus 28-37 for the Bucs. And both ended up with a ton of penalties. Well, Tampa did at least. They had 9 penalties for 103. But the Saints were penalized more yards, 119 on their 6 infractions. Closing line was New Orleans -4, final margin 11 points. Over-under total was 48. This game finished over that number as the two teams combined for 57 points, 581 yards of offense, and 104 total plays. I picked the Saints straight up and to cover against the spread, and I won both those picks. All right, Sunday Night Football, which was played at the new SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California. The new $5 billion home of both the Los Angeles Rams and Los Angeles Chargers. All right, the LA Rams came in at number 21 in my power rankings going into week 1. They faced the Dallas Cowboys, who I ranked at number 6. And you can pretty much call this a 4th upset as the Rams did win 20-17. Rams start the season 1-0. And next week they'll face another NFC East contender in the Philadelphia Eagles Sunday at the Link. The 0-1 Cowboys will go home and open up Jerry World against the Atlanta Falcons. All right, let's start off with the Rams. Jared Goff, 20 of 31, completing 64.5% of his passes for 275 yards, with no touchdowns and 1 interception. He finishes with a 79.4 passer rating, plus 4 carries for 15 yards. Malcolm Brown, 18 carries, 79 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 3 receptions for 31. Cam Akers, 14 carries, 39 yards, 1 reception for 4. Robert Woods has 6 receptions for 105. Cooper Kupp, 4 receptions for 40 yards. And this comes on the heels of him signing that 3-year, $48 million extension with the Rams on Saturday. So Cooper Kupp will be hanging around SoFi for another 3 years. And Tyler Higbee had 3 receptions for 40. Jalen Ramsey and Micah Kaiser each had 6 tackles and combined had 3 passes defense. As for America's team, Dak Prescott, 25 of 39, completing 64.1% of his passes for 266 yards with 1 touchdown and no picks and a 92.5 quarterback rating. Dak also carried the ball 3 times for 30 yards. And then Ezekiel Elliott doing Ezekiel Elliott things. 22 carries, 96 yards, rushing touchdown, 3 receptions, 31 yards, and a receiving touchdown. And then CeeDee Lamb, heralded by many as the top receiver in the 2020 draft class, made his NFL debut with 5 catches for 59 yards. Amari Cooper had 10 receptions on 14 targets for 81 yards. And Michael Gallup, 3 catches for 50. Darian Thompson led the Dallas defense with 9 tackles. And Aldon Smith had 6 tackles and a sack in his first game in the NFL since 2015. Xavier Woods and Emerson Griffin, a pair of former Minnesota Vikings, both making their Cowboys debut. Wait, that's a Xavier Rhodes that played for the Vikings. He's now with the Colts. But Xavier Woods is new to the Cowboys. I forgot where he came from. Anyway, he had 6 tackles. Emerson Griffin had 2 tackles and a pass defense. All right. Total yards favored LA, 422 to 380. Passing yards also favored LA, 269 to 244. And rushing was 153 to 136, also in favor of the Rams. Dallas had 24 first downs, 1 more than the Rams' 23. Whereas Dallas was struggling on late down situations, 3 of 12 on 3rd down, 25%, and 1 of 3 on 4th down, 33.3%. The Rams thrived in these late down situations on Sunday night. 9 of 17 conversions on 3rd down, that's 52.9%, and 1 for 1 on 4th. The Ram defense had 49 tackles, 3 sacks, 4 passes defense, no interceptions. Cowboy defense had 49 tackles as well, with 1 sack, 4 passes defense, and 1 interception. Time of possession goes to LA, 35 minutes and 38 seconds versus 24-22 for Dallas. The Rams were flagged 5 times for 34 yards. Cowboys committed 7 penalties for 50. And this is interesting too because the closing line was a pick'em, although Dallas did go into the game as a favorite. The margin was 3 points. Dallas was favored in this game. The over-under at close was 51.5. This game finished under the total as the 2 teams combined for 37 points, 802 yards on 98 offensive plays, in which both teams ran 49. I picked Dallas to win both straight up and to cover the points. But they fell, and I ended up losing both those picks. All right, that brings us to the Monday night doubleheader, starting off with the Pittsburgh Steelers, number 11 in my Week 1 power rankings, at the New York Giants, sitting at number 29. The Steelers looked sluggish early, but they rebounded and won this game 26-16. Pittsburgh starts the year 1-0. They will host the Denver Broncos in their home opener at Heinz Field on Sunday, while the 0-1 Giants travel to Chicago to face Mitch Trubisky and the Bears. Big Ben Roethlisberger, around this time last year, had that, I think it was either a shoulder or a neck injury. I'm not quite sure, but it cost him the rest of the 2019 season. He was playing his first game since. He went 21-32, playing 65.6% for 229 yards with 3 touchdowns and no interceptions, and finishing the game with a 117.8 quarterback rating. So those are like shades of the old big men. He also carried the ball 3 times for 9 yards. Benny Snell Jr., 19 carries for 113. Juju Smith-Schuster, 6 receptions, 69 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And Deontay Johnson targeted 10 times, caught 6 of those 10 targets for 57 yards. Terrell Edmonds led the Steeler defense with 8 tackles. Devin Bush and Joe Hayden each had 6 tackles. For the Giants, Daniel Jones, 26-41, completing 63.4% of his passes, 279 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, and a 79.2 passer rating. Sorry. He also ran the ball 4 times for 22 yards. All right. Saquon Barkley was not going to run against this ferocious front 7 of the Steelers, and they held him to just 6 yards on 15 carries. But he did somewhat get his yards in the passing game, 6 receptions for 61. Darius Slayton, 6 catches, 102 yards, and 2 scores. Sterling Shepard, 6 receptions for 47 yards. And then Blake Martinez, the tackles leader in the NFL in 2019, came over from the Green Bay Packers in the offseason. In his Giants debut, he came up big with 12 tackles. And James Bradbury, former Carolina Panther, also making his Giants debut. He came up big with 5 tackles, 1 forced fumble, and 2 passes defense. All right. Total yards was 349 for the Steelers and 291 for the Giants. Passing yards favored New York, 262-208. Rushing yards, a big advantage to Pittsburgh, 141 yards, while their defense held the Giants to only 29 yards on the ground. First downs did favor the New York Giants. They had 20 to the Steelers' 19. Both teams finished 8 for 15 on third downs for 53.3% and 1 for 1 on fourth down. The Steelers' defense recorded 47 tackles, 3 sacks, 2 passes defensed, 2 interceptions, and no defensive touchdowns. As for the Giants, they had 51 tackles, 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 3 passes defensed, and no interceptions or defensive touchdowns. Time of possession favored the Steelers at 31 minutes 44 seconds versus 28-16 for the Giants. York was flagged 4 times for 25 yards, Pittsburgh 3 for 21. Closing line was the Steelers -6. Closing margin was 10. Final over-under in this game was 43.5. And at 42 total points, that just missed the total by that much. The two teams combined for 98 offensive plays and 640 yards. I took the Steelers to win both straight up and against the spread and won both picks. And that brings us to game 2 of the Monday night doubleheader and the climax of Kickoff Week 2020 in the National Football League. The Tennessee Titans. Yeah, those Tennessee Titans that made it all the way to the AFC Championship game. While in the process of getting there, taking out both Tom Brady and Lamar Jackson in the process. All right, I had the Titans at number 7 in my power rankings. They were in Denver taking on the injury-ravished Broncos, who after the Von Miller injury last week, I dropped them to number 22 in my official power rankings. In my initial rankings, I had them upwards of, say, I think 17. But after a little pondering, I decided to move them down because that losing Von Miller for the year, that's major. Anyway, Tennessee wins this game 16-14, and they start the year 1-0. They will return home to host the co-leaders in the AFC South, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Yeah, the team that pretty much everyone says is going to be the worst in football. They're going to have the number 1 pick and draft Trevor Lawrence next year. They're tied with these guys, and they got them next on the schedule. The 0-1 Broncos travel to Pittsburgh to face the Steelers. All right, Ryan Tannehill, the comeback player of the year in 2019, went 29 of 43, completing 67.4% of his passes for 249 yards, 2 touchdowns and no picks. He finishes the night with a 97.9 passer rating. He also carried the ball 3 times for 14 yards. Speaking of carrying the ball, Derrick Henry, workhorse type numbers. What more do you expect from Derrick Henry? 31 carries for 116, although he was not as instrumental in the passing attack. 3 catches for 15. That was all he could put up. Speaking of the passing attack, Corey Davis, he had no problems getting balls. 7 catches for 101. Adam Humphries, 6 catches for 47. And A.J. Brown with 5 receptions for 39 yards. Meanwhile, Jonnu Smith and Michael Pruitt each had a touchdown catch for Tennessee. Kevin Byard led the Titans defense with 8 tackles and a forced fumble, while Kenny Vaccaro had 6 tackles. As for the Denver Broncos, Drew Lock was 22 of 33, 66.7% of his passes completed for 216 yards with 1 touchdown and no picks. He finished with a rather respectable 95 passer rating. He also carried the ball 3 times for 5 yards. Melvin Gordon Jr., the ex-San Diego/LA Charger, making his Bronco debut, and he made some noise with 15 carries for 78 yards and a rushing score, and 3 receptions for 8. So not bad. 86 yards on 18 total touches for Melvin Gordon. Phillip Lindsay, 7 carries, 24 yards, 1 reception for 11. Noah Fant, the Bronco tight end, finished with 5 receptions for 81 yards and a touchdown. And rookie wide receiver Jerry Jeudy out of Alabama, who the Broncos took in the first round back in April, had 4 catches for 56 yards in his NFL debut. And then Tim Patrick had 4 grabs for 29. A.J. Johnson led the Denver defense with 10 tackles. Josie Jewell had 7 tackles and a pass defense. And Bryce Callahan also finished the game with 7 tackles. Total yards were 377 for the Titans and 323 for the Broncos. Passing yards favored Tennessee at 247 to 216. Rushing yards also favored the Titans, 130 to 107. First downs were 26 for Tennessee, 19 for Denver. The Titans finished 7 of 16 on third down conversions, that's 43.8%, and 1 for 1 on fourth down. Denver was 3 of 9 on third down, 33.3%, and 0 for 1 on fourth down. Tennessee's defense closes the night with 48 tackles, no sacks, 1 forced fumbled, 1 pass defense, and no interceptions. The Bronco defense had 54 tackles, 1 sack, 5 passes defense, and no interceptions. And Steven Gostkowski, the new kicker for the Tennessee Titans, you probably may have heard of him. He won multiple championships with Brady, Gronk, and Belichick in New England. Well, he made his Titans debut on Monday night, and he was considered the hero in this game as he boots a 25-yard field goal with 17 seconds left to put Tennessee ahead for good. Closing line was the Titans minus 3.5. Final margin was 2 points. The over-under was 42. And there were only 30 points scored in this game, so obviously that missed the 42 by a bit of a margin. The two teams ran 102 offensive plays and totaled 700 yards. I picked Tennessee to win straight up, and I also picked the Titans to cover the 3.5 points. I got the straight up pick, but not the ATS pick in this game. So overall in week 1, I didn't do bad at all. I finished the week at 12-4 in my picks straight up. That's without the point spread. Against the point spread, I did pretty well too. I went 10-6. So, great way to start the season if you ask me. All right, before we go, we're going to run through my week 2 power rankings. Before we go, we're going to run through my week 2 power rankings. And I will say this. One NFC team made a big jump, while another made the biggest drop. And they're right next to the power rankings, so stay tuned for these next few minutes while I'll tell you who those teams are. But I can tell you that we do have 2 new bottom feeders to kick off this week's power rankings, as the New York Jets and the New York Giants both fall to 32 and 31 respectively, each losing 2 spots. Trading spots with both the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Washington football team, both of which moved up 2 spots. Jacksonville to 30 and Washington to 29. The Carolina Panthers, Cincinnati Bengals, Miami Dolphins, and Atlanta Falcons all stay put from spots 28 to 25. The Detroit Lions fell 4 spots to number 24. The Broncos, off of last night's loss to the Titans, slip a spot down to 23, which allows the LA Chargers to leapfrog them up 2 spots to 22. The Indianapolis Colts upset victims at the hands of the Jaguars. They fall 5 spots to number 21. The Cleveland Browns, even though they got stomped by the Ravens, they only fell a spot to 20. So that brings us to the Philadelphia Eagles, the biggest drop on this week's power rankings, falling 7 spots to number 19 following the upset loss to the Washington football team, in which Philadelphia blew a 17-0 lead and allowed Washington to score the final 27 points in that game. Our next team up is our biggest riser in this week's rankings, and that's the Chicago Bears, who with 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to erase a 23-6 deficit in Detroit and win, they move up 5 spots to number 18. The Rams jump 4 spots to 17, followed by the Las Vegas Raiders, who move up 2 to number 16. The Minnesota Texans, the Minnesota Vikings slipped 1 to number 15. The Houston Texans followed suit as they dropped to 14. And jumping both those teams are the Arizona Cardinals, moving up 4 spots to number 13 after their upset win over the 49ers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers fall out of the top 10, down a couple spots to 12. And then moving up 4 to 11 are the New England Patriots. So here is your top 10. The Dallas Cowboys, who lost Sunday night to the Rams. They're down to number 10 after a 4-point drop. That's then followed by the Pittsburgh Steelers, who won last night against the Giants. They move up 2 spots to number 9. The Buffalo Bills hold steady at number 8. And the San Francisco 49ers, losing at home to the Cardinals, they fell 3 spots to 7. While the Green Bay Packers move up 3 spots to number 6 after their shootout win in Minnesota. The Tennessee Titans take San Francisco's spot in the top 5, rising 2 spots to number 5. And then the Seattle Seahawks inched up a spot to 4. Despite their secondary getting gashed by the Falcons, they still won that game. And then my top 3 teams remain the same, with the Baltimore Ravens at number 3, the New Orleans Saints at number 2, and the Kansas City Chiefs at number 1. So that is the week that was in the National Football Week, or in the National Football League, as Kickoff Week 2020 is now in the books. Alright, want some more of this football talk? Like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Ring the bell twice. Get notified every time I upload a new vid. I will be back either tomorrow or Thursday, early Thursday, for the week 2 preview. I got to get everything started for that. And I'll get on that tonight. And I'll probably get on it. And I'll probably record that video either tomorrow, late in the day, or early on Thursday before the Browns-Bengals game that night. So until then, this is Big Al signing off. Enjoy the pigskin. Peace out.